Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos Daf Pei Dalet. We'll move on to a discussion regarding a sfina, a ship. The Mishnah taught us that a sfina is tahira because the pasuk says, "Derech Aniyah belev yam." It is the way of a ship to travel through the ocean. The pasuk here is teaching us a halacha that a sfina, a ship, a boat, is tahir, is not susceptible to tumah, and is connected to yam. It has the same status as an ocean, as a river, as a lake. A lake, a ocean is tahir. In fact, the Mishnah in Kalim tells us, Kol shebayam tahir. Any creature that resides in the yam is also tahir. It's not makabel tumah. So a utensil made from, for instance, the skin of a fish is not makabel tumah. So a yam is tahir, and a sfina which is servicing the yam, which function in the yam, it too has that status and is not makabel tumah. So according to the Mishnah, any type of sfina, regardless of size, shape, form, or the material that the sfina is made of, the sfina will be tahir. Chananya gave us an alternate source for this halacha. Chananya says the reason is because the sfina, the ship, is not customarily transported when it is laden. So when it's full, it's not mitaltal, and therefore it doesn't allow it to be makabel tumah, because that is a requirement, a precondition for kabbalas tumah. The kli, the utensil, needs to be metaltal mali urekan. It needs to be transportable, whether empty or full, as opposed to this large boat, which is not transportable. It's immobile when it's filled up. Now, Tosfos points out, although a fully laden cargo ship can very well travel through the waters of the oceans, says Tosfos, it's not the ship that is really mobile. It is because it's lying in water, it's floating in the water. So the ikar hilucha, says Tosfos, is machmas hamayim, is due to the water. So it's only when it's placed in the water that it can move. It's not inherently transportable and portable, and therefore it is not considered to be metal to malay, and therefore Chananya tells us that is the reason why a sfina is not makabel tumah. The Gemara told us there are two nafkaminas, two halachic differences between these two sources. According to the Tana of Al Mishnah, that the reason is because the ship is connected, related to the yam. So regardless of the size, regardless of what material the sfina is made up of, it will be tar. According to Chananya, if the sfina is made of cheres, of earthenware doesn't have that requirement of metal to malay. I learned that yesterday because earthenware cheres is not included in that pasuk, that connection, that hekesh to sak, and therefore doesn't need to have that characteristic of a sack. It doesn't need to have that ability to be transported when full. Therefore, a sfina shel cheres, a boat made of earthenware, according to Chananya, will be makabel tumah. Likewise, a small boat, a sfinas hayardin, the Gemara called it a Jordan River boat, a small sized ship, which they indeed would move around. They would load it up on the yabasha on land, and then shove it into the river. So this is considered to be transportable. It's considered to be metal til mali, and therefore, according to Chananya, it will be makabel tumah. Continues the Gemara. So we're on the last line of Pegimon Beis, the last two words. Amarav. Ule Chananya, back up on Pedal Amar Aleph. Ule Chananya, according to Chananya, that we find that this small ship, which is portable, the Sfinas Hayardin, and therefore it is Tameh. If so, says Rava, Tiltul adei shvarim shmei tiltul. If this a sfina or a carriage is portable, is customarily carried, is moved around through shvarim, it's pulled through oxen, shmei tiltul. That is regarded as tiltul. It's considered as though the item is movable, is transportable, is mobile, and although it is large and heavy, and a person cannot move this item, cannot carry it, nevertheless the fact that shvarim can do it, oxen can do it, that is sufficient to regard it as a metal to mali v'rekan and as makabel tumah. What is the point of something which needs to be metal to mali v'rekan? So we're speaking about a large utensil. We learn elsewhere that we're speaking about a kli which can be makabel 40 sa'ah of liquid. It's a very large size kli. Therefore, as Rashi tells us elsewhere, it loses its status of a kli, of a utensil. It is treated like an oil, like a fixture, like a structure. So it has a din of a structure, not of a utensil, and therefore it is not makabel tumah. So once again, the whole concept here is based on the fact that something too large and too heavy, and regarded as immobile, doesn't have a din of a kli. It's treated like an oil, like a structure. It's meant to remain in place, and therefore it is not makabel tumah. Says the Gemara, but if it can be transported through shvarim, through oxen, and it is customary to do so, for instance, a wagon, which is it's very typical to hook up the wagon to the oxen and to have the wagon pulled in that manner, that is considered to be a utensil. It's a kli. It's not regarded any longer as a structure, and therefore it is makabel tumah. So once again, if this sfina or this wagon we're going to see soon is very large and actually contains the shiur of 40 sa'ah of lach, it's large enough to have that dimension of 40 sa'ah. Generally speaking, that has a din of an oil. Now, of course, the 40 sa'ah doesn't need to be the actual content. The dimension of the kli, even from the outside, if we measure it from the outside, so it has the dimension of a 40 sa'ah, of potentially being able to contain 40 sa'ah. It's too large to be considered a utensil. It's regarded as an oil, provided that it is immobile when it is filled up, when it is fully laden. But something which is customarily pulled and carried, whether through people or even through oxen, that is regarded as metaltal mali v'reikon, and as a din of a kli, and as makabel tumah. Now, Tosfos Rosh points out that although the Gemara references this halacha to Chananya, but nevertheless, this pertains to the Rabbanan as well. There's no discussion here. If this thing is carried through oxen, it is treated as a kli and as makabel tumah. Says the Gemara, we'll actually have a proof from a Mishnah to this concept, that if something is merely carried, even through oxen, that is sufficient to regard it as a kli and as makabel tumah. This nan, as we learned in the Mishnah in Kalim, Sholish Agola, saying there are three different forms of carriages which have three different halachas. The first one is asuya ki ketedra, if it's fashioned like a shiur, meant to transport people. So this agola, which transports people, is tmeya midras, has a tumas midras. Midras means if a zav should sit or lie on it, it becomes an avatuma. So this is only regarding something which is designated for sitting or lying. And indeed, this agola, which is asuya ki ketedra, since it's intended for transporting people, it is regarded as something which can be metame medras, can become tame tumas medras through a zav. The second category is kemita. If this agola, if this carriage, if this wagon has the shape of a mita, it's a flatbed wagon meant to transport merchandise. So it has the ability to be makabel, to receive. It seems like it sags somewhat, so it has the capability of being makabel. In this case, it is tmei meis. It doesn't have tumas medras, only tmei meis. So it's makabel other tumas, but not tumas medras, as Rashi will explain, since it's not designated for lying or sitting on it, which is a precondition for tumas medras. Finally, what is the third category of an agola? Shalavanim. It's meant to transport stones, so it has lattice work, which has large holes, and it is too large. The holes are too large to regard it as a proper clay kibble, a proper receptacle, and therefore it is tahir miklum, is entirely tahir. Let's take a look at Rashi, who gives us the reason, the background for these three categories. So Rashi begins on the third line from the top, beginning with the words kiktidra. Says Rashi ktsara umukefes mishalish stadin. So it's a rather short or narrow. Ktsara means it's not this long thing. It's shaped for, appropriate for carrying a person. Umukefes mishalish stadin, surrounded from three sides like a chair. Tmeya midra, says Rashi, shalish shiva muychedesi, because it is designated for sitting. The next category is this agola, which is meant to transport merchandise. It is kemita, says Rashi, shiaruka, it is longer. Umitachtea mikabeles kemita shel oir. It can receive just like a leather, a bed. So they still spread the leather sheet over the frame of the bed. So this agala is formed in a similar fashion. It has the ability to receive, to hold items. Shein bashum nekev, it doesn't have any holes. And indeed, it is considered to be a klei kibul. Says Rashi, Tmeya tumas meis, kloima, mikabela shar tumas, kulan. It is susceptible to other tumas, chutz mitumas medrus, except for tumas medrus. The kli hava, lekabel tuma, it is regarded as a utensil for kabelos tuma. Ulishiva eni milchedes, but it's not designated, it's not destined for sitting. Shetoyin b'pargamatya, they use it to load merchandise. It is meant to carry pargamatya merchandise, and therefore, it does not have the ability to be mekabel tumas medrus. Why? So the object turns to the Zav who's sitting on it and says, get up, we need to perform our task. This is not meant for you to sit on. And therefore, it is not suitable for Tumas Medras, only for other Tumas. Says Rashi, Tumas Tmei Meis. Why specifically do we use the term Tmei Meis? Because this is an example of an Ava Tumah, a very stringent form of Tumah. This is what the Mishnah means to say. Ava Tumahu, Ali de Meis. This Agola can become an Ava Tumah through a mace, but not through a Zav. So the reason why the Mishnah quotes, mentions Ava Tumah, it's merely in contrast to Tumas Midras. It means to say as follows: it cannot become an Ava Tumah through a Zav, through Tumas Midras, but it can become an Ava Tumah through a mace. But certainly it can become other types of Tumah as well. The Mishnah is merely mentioning Ava Tumah in contrast to Tumas Midras. Continues the Rashi, Vishal Avonim. Ha'asuya la'hoilach ba'avonim. It's a fashion to transport in it stones, Torah Miklum, is entirely Torah, in a Mekabel Shum Tumah. Why? Lefisha Prutza Mitachtea Nekavim Gedolim, because it has these large holes. V'loi Kliu. It is not a Kli. The Chol HaKelim. Shi'uran Kiri Moinim. In order for it to be a Kli, it needs to have a complete bottom. It can't have these holes which allow a rimoin, a pomegranate, to slip through. These holes are larger than a pomegranate, therefore it is not considered to be a kli for kabbalos tumah. So once again, the Mishnah listed for us 3 types of agolis, of carriages, of wagons. One of them has tumas medras, is meant for sitting. One of them has tumas mace, because it's meant for transporting, for holding merchandise. The third one is only meant for carrying stones. It has these large holes. It is not considered to be a kli kibul, a receptacle, and therefore it is entirely Torah. Says the Gemara, back to the Gemara. V'amar v'yechanan, v'im yeshba, beis kibul rimoinim, tmeya tmei meis. This last thing on the list, this agola, which has these large holes meant for avanim, what if the holes are smaller? It allows the rimoin to stay inside, so it's not large enough for the rimoin, for the pomegranate to slip through it. In this case, it has a din of a klei kibul. So this wooden wagon will be considered a klei kibul and is tamei tmei meis. Now, as Rashi points out, although we're speaking about a large size wagon, large size agola, which can only be transported by hitching it up to the shvarim, to the oxen. So when it's full, it's too heavy to be transported unless you hook it up to the oxen. Says Rabbi Yochanan, it is regarded as a kli and as makabel tumah. See, here we see that something, although it's very heavy, large and heavy, since it's transportable through shvarim, it is makabel tumah. The Gemara will continue to prove it from the next Mishnah as well, which will support Rabbi Yochanan's interpretation of the Mishnah here, that indeed this type of item is makabel tumah. This is another Mishnah which says, Sholosh tevesein. There are 3 categories of chests. Number 1 is tevasha pischa mitzida, a chest which has the opening on the side. In this case, it can contain items inside and as well can serve as a seat for a zav. Therefore, it has this dual function as metame, tmei meis and tumas medras. Says the Mishnah, tmeya midras. It can also become tumas midras because it is suitable for sitting on. Milamala. However, if the opening of this chest is up on top, in this case, it's not suitable for sitting. Tmeya tmei meis. It can only become tamei tmei meis because it is a container. Finally, a very large chest. So this this thing that has the dimension of the 40 sa'ah that we mentioned earlier, it is haba b'mida, as Rashi says. The reason why it's called haba b'mida because it needs to be formally measured to ascertain its size. It's large, it's big. This thing is Tahir Miklum, is entirely Tur, is not Makabal Tumah, is not regarded as a clay kibul, as a clayli, but rather, as we mentioned before, regarded as a structure, as an oil. Now we see from this Mishnah, the fact that this Mishnah listed for us these three categories: the Teva, which is Metame Midras, the one which is Metame Tmei Meis, and finally the one which is large in size and is completely Tur. In contrast to the previous Mishnah, which did not give us this last definition, this last category, that the Agola, which is too large in size, will be completely Tur. The Mishnah omitted that. Why? Apparently, the Agola has a different status, because even when it's large in size, since it can be hitched up to the Shvarim, and it is customary to do so, it is regarded as Metal to Mole, and has a din of a Kli Kibul, and indeed is Makabal Tumah, in accordance to Rav Yochanan's interpretation. So this is a raya, a support to Rav's halach, that a large Kli, since it is hitched up to the Shvarim, and is carried and pulled by the oxen, so regardless of its size and shape, and the fact that it is so heavy when laden, since it has the ability to be carried, and it is typically done so, it is carried by the Shvarim, it is regarded as a Kli. So in summary, we learned that there are three types of wagons. There are three types of chests. We have the top case, which is Ro'i Yeshiva, is suitable for sitting on it, that is Makabal Tumas Medras. We have the case where it's not suitable for yeshiva, but merely to contain, that is Tamei Tmei Meis. What about if it's not suitable for anything? Then certainly it is Tar. What about the wagon, which is very large and heavy when full? However, it is metaltal adei shvarim. It is carried through the oxen. That is tamei. The teva apparently doesn't have this custom to be pulled by shvarim, and therefore this large teva, which is ba b'mida, is tahira miklum. Continues the Gemara. Tanar Rabban, we learned in the Brisa. Midras kli cheres tar. A midras of a kli cheres, of an earthenware kli, is tar, meaning that a kli cheres does not have the ability to be makabel tumas medras. The Gemara soon will give us the reasons for this. So the only thing can be tumas maga, or perhaps tumas masa, but not tumas medras. Rabbi Yossi Omer afasfina. A ship, a boat, has the same din. Says the Gemara, Maika Hamar. What is he saying? He's adding something to Tanakama. Tanakama says that a klicheres will not have tumas medras, but certainly a klicheres will become tamei through tumas maga. So if the tamei actually touches the inside of klicheres, it will become tamei. Rabbi Yossi comes and adds, you should know that a boat also has this category and is also tar, as we learned earlier. A sfina is tar. So what does he mean to say? A boat is not only a tar on account of tumas medras. A ship is also tar entirely, even through tumas maga, will not affect the ship. So what relation does this a boat have to a klicheres, which is a halacha strictly regarding tumas medras? This is what how we are meant to learn the Brisa. Midras klicheres tar. A klicheres doesn't have the ability to be makabel tumas medras. Uma'agoi tamei. But through direct contact with the klicheres, certainly the cheres will become tamei. Usfina shel cheres tmei kechananya. What about a halacha of a ship? So it depends what it's made of. If it's made of cheres, of earthenware, then it can be makabel tumah, in accordance with the sheet of Chananya, who told us that a ship made of cheres, although it is not portable when full, it is not metal temale, that restriction doesn't apply to cheres, and therefore a sfina made of cheres can become tamei. If, for instance, if a tamei will go ahead and touch it, it will become tamei. So this is in accordance with Chananya's sheet. And indeed the Tanakama here agrees with Chananya. Rabbi Yossi Omer says no. Sfina tahira ketana didan. A ship is also tar, meaning that even though it is a klicheres, it is made of earth, it will still have the status of a sfina which is tar, in accordance with the Mishnah, with our Tana of the Mishnah, who tells us that a sfina is always tar, regardless of the material with which the sfina is made up, because we connect sfina to yam, so any sort of boat is tar. Says the Gemara, Rav Papa challenged this interpretation of the Brisa, my af. We still don't understand why Rav Yossi uses the word af. Rav Yossi says, af asfina. A sfina also will be tar. Because Rav Yossi is relating to the sfina in terms of Tumas Medras and also in terms of Tumas Maga. He holds that a sfina is entirely tar. A sfina is connected to Yam. So even through Maga, through direct contact with the sfina will remain tar. This doesn't add anything to Tanakama, because Tanakama was not speaking about a Tumas Maga which is tar. Tanakama never related to the Tahara of Maga. Tanakama was speaking about a Midras Klicheres. He said that Klicheres doesn't have Tumas Medras. The Tanakama spoke about the fact that a Cheres can be become a Tumah through Maga. The Tanakama spoke about the fact that a Sfina Shel Cheres will become Tameh through Maga. So Rabbi Yossi is disputing that. He's saying you should know that a Sfina Shel Cheres will be entirely Tur. Why does he use the words Af? He should simply say, Rabbi Yossi Omer, no, a Sfina Shel Cheres is Tur. Why Af? It seems to me that he's adding something to Tanakama. Not only your example of Tahara, I'm going to add another example of Tahara. It's inaccurate. Ella Amar of Papa, Hachi Kama. This is how we're meant to learn the Brisa. The Brisa begins by saying Midras Klicheres Tar. A Klicheres cannot become Tameh Tumas Medras. Goy Tameh, but can become Tameh through Maga. Vishal Eitz. However, a Kli of Eitz made of wood, Bein Medrasai, Bein Magoy Tameh. It can become Tameh through Medras and through direct contact. Usfina Sayardin Tahira. But a small Sfina, a Sfina Sayardin, as we learned yesterday, it's transportable through people transport it. They fill it on the land and they shove it into the Jordan River. Nevertheless, this small ship, even though it's metal to malay, it will remain tar. Ketana dedan. In accordance with the view of our Tana, of our Mishnah, it tells us that a Sfina, regardless of the size, of the shape, of the form, will always remain tar. So this is the sheet of Tanakama, who follows the Tana of our Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. Rabbi Yossi follows the sheet of Chananya. Rabbi Yossi, Afa Sfina, Tmeya Kechananya. I maintain that a Sfina, a small Sfina, will become Tameh through Maga, in accordance with the sheet of Chananya, who holds that a small ship doesn't have that exemption, doesn't have that allowance, doesn't have that Tahara of a Sfina. It's small enough, and therefore it is transportable when laden, and is metal timole, and therefore is mekabel tumas maga. So therefore, Rabbi Yossi is actually adding something now. Af asfina, meaning he's referencing to the Tanakama's words, the Tanakama who said that a kilcheres will have tumas maga, a kli'etz will have tumas maga, and Rabbi Yossi is coming to add to that, and he's saying, you should know that a sfina, a small sfina sayardim, will also be susceptible to tumas maga. So in summary, we learned the halacha regarding a klicheres, which will become tamei tumas maga, but not tumas medras. A kli'etz has both tumas, whether maga or whether medras. What about a ship? Here we have a machlekes. So regarding tumas medras, Tais explained that a ship will never have tumas medras. It is meant to mainly to be loaded up, and does not have the status of a miyuchad lemedras, designated for sitting on it. Its primary function is to have it loaded up with merchandise. Therefore, it doesn't have tumas medras. What about tumas maga? So according to the Tana of our Mishnah, any type of sfina will be tar, whether it's a small ship made of wood, a large ship made of cheres, regardless of its makeup, of its shape, of its form, it will be tar. We connect Sfina to Yam, just as the Yam is tar, Sfina is tar. According to Chananya, these two types of Sfinas will be tamei. Why? Because a small Sfina made of wood will be tamei since it is metal to mole. It is transportable and full. What about a Sfina made of cheres? Even a large Sfina, according to Chananya, this too will be mekabel tumas maga, because the precondition of the ability to transport it when full doesn't apply to material of cheres, and therefore this sfina will be tamei. Now, as the Gemara concluded, Tanakama of this brisa follows the shita of our Mishnah and maintains that all types of sfinas are tar. Rabbi Yossi follows in accordance with the Shita of Chananya, and therefore he is metame these two types of boats. Continues the Gemara. Okay, we just mentioned a chiddush that a kli cheres cannot be mekabel tuma of tumas midras. Medras kli cheres minol on the tar. How do we know that? That a cheres is not susceptible to tumas medras. Amar chizkiya d'amakra. The pasuk says v'isha sheyigav b'mishkavai. If one comes into contact with the mishkav of the zav, something which he used to lie on. So the pasuk here uses the word b'mishkavai, in his mishkav. Says the Gemara makish mishkavai loi. The pasuk connects, intertwines the mishkav of the zav with the actual zav. They both contain the same word. The person and the mishkav are meant to be connected. They're meant to be tied together. What does that mean? Mahu islay tahara b'mikvah. Just as the zav certainly has the ability to immerse in a mikvah and become tar, as Tosfos points out, actually a zav needs mayim chaim, needs fresh spring water. Nevertheless, he has the ability to be matar himself through immersion. So that's a characteristic found within the zav himself. Now the Torah connects the two things. The Torah requires that the mishkav hazav, meaning for something to have the ability to acquire a status of mishkav hazav, of medras hazav. So medras is a term applied to something which he sits on, something which he lies on, for instance. So in order for something to have that status, to have that tumah, tumas meshkav, and have a din of avatuma, it needs to fit a certain requirement. It needs to meet a certain requirement. It needs to have a similar characteristic of the zav himself. So just as the zav has the ability to have tahara through the mikvah, af mishkavai, likewise the mishkav needs to have that ability, that potential to become tar in order for it to be considered in the status of a mishkav. Af mishkavai nami islay tar b'mikvah. So, a kli cheres, as Rashi points out, doesn't have that ability. One cannot simply immerse a kli cheres in the mikvah and be matar. The only way to be matar kli cheres is by breaking it. Therefore, a kli cheres is excluded from this category of mishkav. It does not have the ability to become a mishkav, and Moshe does not have the ability to be makabel tumas midras. We see an interesting thing that the tumah of mishkav hazav is not merely a transfer of tumah. For instance, through maga, so zav touches something, he transfers tumah onto the item. The mishkav is something which he uses, something which is providing a function for the zav. It associates with the zav. He relates to it. He's sitting on it. He's lying on it. It's considered to be a utensil of shimush for the zav, which is servicing the zav. So we understand better this connection. The Torah connects the two things. They need to be similar in style, in nature, in halachic nature. And just as the zav has tahara b'mikvah, likewise the mishkav needs to have that potential of tahara. Other than therefore we exclude a kli cheres, which doesn't have that ability, and therefore does not have the din of tumas medras. So this is one source for this halach. The Gemara will give us another source. The very Rishmal Tana, kimishkav nidasa yela. The pasuk is speaking about a zava. The pasuk says that a zava, so as a woman zav, she will also have this din of mishkav. That her mishkav, something which she lies on, will have the din of mishkav nidasa, just as the mishkav of a nida, this stringent form of tumah, of avatuma. Once again, we see that correlation, that connection between the mishkav and the nida and the person. Makish mishkavala. The Torah connects, the Torah intertwines, closely knits the mishkav to the nida herself. Therefore, we're meant to make that connection. Mahi islo tar b'mikvah, just as she has the ability to immerse in mikvah and become tar. Af mishkava, likewise the mishkav, in order for it to have the ability to become tamei with a tumas mishkav, nami isla tahar b'mikvah, needs to have that ability, that potential for tahar and mikvah. La'afuki kli cheres, to exclude, we're meant to rule out a kli cheres, to lesle tahar b'mikvah, it doesn't have this ability of tahar and mikvah. Says the Gemara, Mosiv Rabbi Lo. He's going to ask a kasha on this rule, on this formula, on this assertion that a kli cheres does not have tumas medras because it lacks the potential of tahar b'mikvah. We have a brayso which says as follows: mapats. This is a mat. Rashi says a mapats made of konim, of bamboos, of reeds, has a din of kli eitz. Now this is a kli eitz without any containment ability. It's not a container. It's not a receptacle. It's a flatbed mat. Says the brayso, mapats b'meis minayin. How do we know that it can become tummy tumas meis? As Rashi explains, it's not a klei kibul, it's pshute klietz. Ordinarily speaking, a pshute klietz, a wooden utensil which has no receiving capability, will not become tummy. Says the Brisa, perhaps this mapatz can become tummy through tumas meis. Says the Brisa, yes, I'll prove it to you. Minai, what is the source? We will learn it from a kavachayim. V'dinu, we'll use the following formula to derive tumas meis, even to this flatbed mapatz. Says the Gemara, v'dinu, umar pachin tanim. Since we find by pachin tanim, Rashi says this is a small klecheres, which is has a very small opening. Shetahirim bezav. They are tired on account of zav, meaning a zav cannot be matame these small earthenware kalim. Rashi explains the zav can't even put his finger through the hole; it's too small, so you can't actually come into contact with the interior of the klicheres. And a klicheres will only be matame from its interior. Therefore, the zav cannot reach the klicheres from the inside and cannot affect tuma on the klicheres. Likewise, says Rashi, this klicheres cannot become tummy tumas medras because it's not intended for sitting on it. It's not asir li yeshiva. Number one. Number two, it's a klicheres. As we just learned, a klicheres is not mekabel tumas medras. So in any case, these pachem tanan, these small klicheres, are tor on account of zav. They cannot contract tuma, cannot receive tuma from a zav. So although they have that disability, nevertheless, says the Gemara Tumei b'meis, they can receive tuma from a mace. As Rashi says, if they're in an oil mace, they're sitting under one roof with a mace, they will become tummy. So although they have that chisarn, that deficiency, they cannot become tummy through a zav, but they can become tummy through a mace. Says the Gemara, mapat, certainly a mapat, this flat mat, she tummy bezav, which can become tummy through a zav, because it is suitable for lying on it. And if the zav will lie on it, it will become tummy medras. So since it has that advantage over these pacham tanim, certainly, ein of course, it is understandable sheyei tamei b'meis, that this mapatz should become tummy through tumas meis. It should be susceptible to tumas meis. So this is a kavachayim, a formula which applies tumas meis to mapatz. Once again, since we find that pacham tanim, which have that deficiency, don't have the ability to have tuma from a zav, nevertheless they have the ability to have tumas meis. Certainly this mapatz, this mat, although it's a flat klietz, pshute klietz, since we find that it has an advantage, it can be makabel tumas medras if a zav will sit on it. So certainly, of course, it should have the ability to have tumas meis, and therefore we see from here that the mat will become tummy tumas meis. Okay, so this is the Bryce. So this was a kasha posed by Rabbi Law as follows. He says, V'hamai, how could you suggest that this mat can become tummy through a zav, tumas medras? Lying on this mat will become tummy, the mat will make it a mishkav, a zav, and avatuma. V'hamai, how can that be so? We just learned a formula, an equation. The only thing that can become tummy to mismedras is if it has the ability to become tar in a mikveh. This mat does not have that ability, that potential for tar b'mikveh. As Rashi explains, the psukim in the Torah discussing tefillah relates to kalim which have a toich, a clay kibul, are containers. Only they seem to have that din of tahar b'mikveh. But something which is a flat kli, a pshute klietz, that cannot be derived from those psukim, that cannot have a din of tahara b'mikveh. If so, how can it have a tumas midras? So this was the kasha posed by Rabbi Law. This formula doesn't work with this brisa. This brisa tells us that even a flat mat, a pshuti klietz, which is pretty clear from the psukim does not have the potential for tahara b'mikveh, will nevertheless have tumas midras. How is that so? Amar le Reb Chanina. Shani Hasam, there's different. Why? Now, although this particular item doesn't have the ability for tahara b'mikveh, but its its type, the type of material, meaning a wooden utensil, certainly can be immersed in a mikveh. So although this particular utensil doesn't have the ability, but its class, does have the ability, and that's sufficient. is sufficient to be considered for tumas medrus. Once again, shani yasam hoyel b'ikar b'minay, because in its in its class, we do find the din of tahara b'mikvah. Therefore, since a ordinary kliyat does have that ability, therefore this mapat, which is a kliyat, will also have the din of tumas medrus. Amar lei, so we responded to this. Rachmana litzlam haidaita. Hashem should save us from this opinion, from this understanding. What connection? This particular item does not have the ability for tahara b'mikvah, just because something else made of the similar material does. What effect does it have? What bearing does it have on this mat? If this mat can't be toivel, it can't have medrus. It says more adarabah, just the opposite. Rachmana litzlam medata dedach. Hashem should save us from your opinion. Meaning, Rab Chanina was so confident in this response. Says the Gemara of time in my indeed. What is the reason for this rationale? How can you apply? How can you say that just because another utensil made of similar material has the ability to be toivel in the mikvah? Due to this, we regard this maputz, this kliyat, as being suitable for tumas medrus. What is the reason for this? Haven't we said that we had learned from the pasuk that the mishkav itself is meant to be close knit to the zav, meaning they both have to have the same characteristic of tahara b'mikvah. So what good does it do to me that another kli has that ability, but this particular utensil doesn't have the ability? What is the reason for this? For this understanding, for this svara, for this rationale? Says the Gemara, Trei Kroiksiv. You must know that there are actually two psukim, which discusses the halacha of the mishkav with regard to our context here. Says the Gemara Ksiv, we have one pasuk which says V'isha sheishka b'mishkavai. This was the pasuk mentioned earlier. So this pasuk indeed ties and wraps together the mishkav with the person. B'mishkavai, the person with the mishkav, all wrapped in one word, very very closely related to each other. Uksiva, we have another pasuk which seems to separate the two somewhat. Uksiva chol mishkav asher yishkav alav azav yitma. Any mishkav which the zav will lie on will become tamei. Now in this pasuk, we don't have that close correlation between the mishkav and the zav. The pasuk states them separately. V'chol mishkav. So here we have the object of the mishkav asher yishkav hazav. So they're both stated separately. So there's some sort of a disconnect between the two. Okay, so how are we meant to learn these two psukim in tandem? As follows. Yesh b'minoi. So if we are speaking about an object where something else made of its class of material, its type of material, for instance this mat, which is made of eights of wood, and there's something else made of the same min, of the same type, which has the ability to immerse in a mikvah, yesh b'minoi, if there is to be found in its class, in that case that's sufficient. Af agav the less leitar b'mikvah. In this case, even if this object itself doesn't have the ability for tar b'mikvah, that's okay, that's sufficient to apply to mesmedus to it. Like the example of the mat. So this is learned from the second pasuk, which disconnects the mishkav from the person, meaning that we don't need to apply this requirement all the way. There are some cases where even if the mishkav is separate, has different characteristics than the zav itself, this particular object doesn't really have the ability of immersion in mikvah. Nevertheless, it is sufficient since it is the proper class, is made of the proper material, which does have the potential of tahar mikvah. Continues the Gemara, however, if this phenomenon doesn't exist, if within its class of material, its type of material, there is no potential for tahar mikvah, for instance, cheres, which absolutely, positively cannot be immersed in a mikvah. In this case, it is deemed deficient. Makish mishkavai. In this case, we apply the first pasuk, which wraps together mishkavai, the mishkav, with the person, just as a person has the potential, possesses the ability to be toivel. The mishkav also requires that. It needs to have that characteristic, that nature of tahar b'mikvah, as opposed to klicheres, which cannot become a tummy tumas medrus. So this was Rav Chanina's response, that yes, we have this din, that's requirement, that a tumas mishkav, and mishkav needs to have the ability of tahar b'mikvah in order for it to attain, to attract tumas medrus. However, once it is made of the proper material, for instance this mat is made of eights, where we find tahar b'mikvah, when it comes to a utensil made of 8. So even though this particular object doesn't have that ability, it is sufficient, and it can become common tumas medrash, as opposed to cheres, which doesn't have the ability whatsoever. In this case, it doesn't relate to the zav, and does not have the ability to become common tumas medrash. Continues the Gemara, another source for this chiddush that a kli cheres will not be makabel tumas medrash. Rava Amar, midrash kli cheres tar miyacha, from this pasuk. The pasuk says, v'kol kli basuach, any open kli. This is referring to a kli cheres, as Rashi says, because a kli cheres can only receive tuma through its opening, only if the tuma actually enters the airspace of the kli cheres. Kol kli pasuach, meaning it contracts tuma through its opening. This is a drasha that is referring to a kli cheres. The pasuk says, this kli cheres asher ein tzamid pasel olav, which does not have a tzamid, a lid, pasel, which is firmly fixed, sealed onto this cheres. It's sitting now in a oil hames, under the same roof as a mace. It will not protect the contents within. Ha yesh samid pasel olav tar. But in a case where the lid is firmly fastened to the kli cheres, tar, it will be tar, meaning it protects, it forms as a barrier to the contents within, and they do not contract tuma from the mace, even though they're sitting in the oil mace. Tar hu, it is tar. Now we know Rashi gives us a rule here that only a kli which is tar, which in itself is tar, can present that barrier, that protection for the contents within. But if the kli itself is tummy, certainly it can't protect the contents within from the tumas mace. Says the Gemara, Mila Yaskin, are we not speaking about the Yachdinu Lishtanida? This kli cheres discussed here in the pasuk, which gives protection, provides a barrier for the contents within. Are we not speaking about a kli cheres which was perhaps designated for his wife Nida to sit on? The Torah regards this as a kli cheres which is tar. It's not makabel tuma, even though his wife actually sits on it. Apparently, a kli cheres cannot be makabel tumas medrash. So in summary, we learned the halacha that a kli cheres will not become tamei through midrash. If a zav, if a nida will sit on it, rely on it, they will not become, the kli cheres will not become tamei. We have three sources. We have a pasuk which says, Isha sheishka b'mishkavai. The word mishkavai includes both. It references the person and the mishkav itself. They are both closely related, and therefore they need to have a similar characteristic. Just as the person can become tar, the item also needs to have that potential of tahara in order for it to be considered for tumas medrash, as opposed to a kli cheres, which does not have that ability. The Gemara concluded that as long as the material from which this item is made of has a potential for tahara b'mikvah, for instance, this wooden mat, which is made of eitz, well, we find that eitz elsewhere, a clay kilo of eitz has a potential for tahara b'mikvah, that is sufficient to apply to masmedrash to this wooden mat. And that is learned from a different pasuk, b'kol mishkav, asher yishkav alav hazav. There the Torah slightly disconnects the mishkav from the zav. They don't need to be entirely related. So even though it's just the material type, the class of this object, which has potential for tahara, that is sufficient to apply to masmedrash to this item as well. We have another pasuk, which is the mishkav nidasa. Here too, the Torah connects the nida with the mishkav, and just as the nida has tahara b'mikvah, the mishkav also has that potential, as opposed to cheres, which doesn't have that potential. As Rashi points out, the only way to mitar kli cheres is through breakage. Finally, Rava gives us an alternate source for this halacha. From the halacha of tzamid pasel, Torah says a kli cheres, which is covered with a firmly fastened lid, it will protect the contents within from the oil hames. Now we know that can only apply to a kli which is tar. Now the Torah is relating to kli cheres, even one which perhaps his wife Nida sat on it. How can that protect the contents? Apparently, even a kli cheres which a nida sat on will remain tar, since a kli cheres cannot become tamei tumas medrash. Continues the Mishnah, Minayin la'aruga. So the Mishnah here will continue the sequence of Mishnahs which are going to find sources, mekaris, for various halachas. We began the parak with the source of the tumah of avodah zarah. The Mishnah by us will give us a source for a specific halacha pertaining to kalayim. Kalayim is the joint planting of various species, which is an isser, minat Torah in Eretz Yisrael. In Chutz La'aretz, some forms of kalayim asam d'Rabbanan. So the Mishnah goes as follows: Minayin la'aruga. How do we know the halacha, the following halacha? La'aruga, a patch, a garden patch, a small patch, which has a size, shehi shisha al shisha tfachim, which has a dimension of 6 tfachim long by 6 tfachim wide, a very small area. Shezorim b'seicha, chamisha zeroinin. We can plant within this small area no less than 5 zeroin, 5 seeds, for instance, 5 species of vegetables. How is he going to do that? Dalit, 4 varieties, al dal druchas aruga, on the 4 perimeters of this patch, va'achas, and the 5th one, be'emtza, smack in the middle. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, ki ka'aretz toitzi simcha. This is a pasuk in Yeshaya, a nevuah, a prophecy for the days to come when Klal Yisrael, although currently very low, downtrodden, la'asad love in days to come, David Mashiach will sprout forth in all our glory. And it's equated as an analogy to the aretz, to the earth, which sprouts forth its plants, its vegetables, its seeds. Ki aretz toitzi simcha. Just like the aretz will bring out its plants. Ki aretz toitzi simcha v'chagina v'chagana zero'eo satzmiach. And this garden will sprout forth, grow forth its seeds. So too Klal Yisrael will sprout forth, will grow forth, will come across and rejuvenate, regenerate, and come out in its full glory. So this is a pasuk in Yeshaya describing plants and seeds growing. The Gemara uses this as a hint, as a remez to the halacha contained in our Mishnah, that 5 varieties, 5 types can be planted in close proximity. The Mishnah concludes, Zar nemar. The pasuk concludes with the words zeru'eo satzmiach. It doesn't say it in a lashon yachid of zar'a, rather ela zeru'eha. It's a plural term denoting two types of Israel. Explains the Gemara. My mashna. Where do we hear from this pasuk that there are 5 species? Amar Vida. Let's count. Kicha aretz toitzi simcha. Toitzi will bring forth. Chad, it's referring to one type. Simcha, it's growth. Chad, that's another type. Hare trei, for a total of 2 species. Zeru eha, this is a plural term again. Trei, we have another 2. Ha'arba, we have a total of 4 different types of varieties. Satzmiach, the final word is satzmiach. This adds another species. Chad, so we have a total of ha'chamisha, we have a total of 5. So we can plant 5 varieties in one little area. Now, how big is the area? Maybe it's 10 amas by 10 amas. Says the Gemara, we need step 2. The Rabbanan knew, they determined the chamisha, 5 varieties. Be'eshita, in this area of 6 by 6 tfachim, lo yanki me'adadi. Don't interfere with each other. Don't draw sustenance from the same area. So they're not going to regard it as kilayim. They're not yonik from each other. Let's see Rashi will give us the understanding of this Gemara and actually a comprehensive introduction to halachas of kilayim. Perhaps let's go back to Rashi in the beginning of the Mishnah here, beginning of the words shezorim b'soicha heizerein. So we may plant 5 types in this patch. V'lo yahavi irvuv. It is not considered to be confused and mixed up. Sheyeshba, because there is sufficient space in this small patch, k'dei lahafresh beineim, to provide separation between these different varieties. Hefesh aroi, the proper separation. Dalid midal druchas aruga. So he puts 4 on the 4 perimeters. Memalis kol ruach. He fills up the perimeter. Ad samach l'kar, until very close to the corner, as we see in this diagram here on the left side. So he fills the sides up until the corner, but leaves the actual corner fallow. And the 5th type will be placed smack in the middle of the aruga, as Rashi will explain. Continues Rashi, va'achas be'emtza, garin echad. So one right in the middle. Va'afapi shekol eitz la'kronis, smuchen zelazeh. Now Rashi has a kasha. He fills the perimeters with vegetables, and they come very close to each other. They almost meet at the corner. So they're very close. There's no harchaka there. There's no separation of 3 tfachim, which is the required amount to separate the yinika, the sustenance of these 2 types. They draw from each other, meaning they draw sustenance and nourishment from the very same patch of earth. Why is that not kalayim? Says Rashi, there's no concern. Ein kan beis michush. There's no concern. The gabi kalayim hekeru de ba'inan. All we need is this separation. It needs to appear distinct and separate, and that's enough. So that it does not appear mixed up, interconnected, mingled, and confused. When the Torah discusses the Isser Kalayim, the Torah uses the words Kalayim. What is the word Kalayim? Confusion. As the Targum Unkla says, Eruven. So as long as it doesn't appear as a confusion, that is fine. We're not concerned about nourishment, about sustenance. Even when it comes to Kalei Kerem, the Isser to plant, for instance, a vegetable in a vineyard, which is the Isser D'Oraisa, there too, we apply this concept. Separateness is sufficient. Because it's not, as it says in the Mishnah. So one farmer could place his vines right on one side of the fence, and his fellow neighbor can plant those vegetables right on the other side, very close, as long as it's the other side of the fence. Certainly over there, they're nourishing from the same source. Certainly this concept will apply to Kalei Zroim, which is only Yisod Rabbanan. We're not concerned about nourishment and sustenance. Kedisnan, as we learned, Gabi Roish Tur L'Kaman B'Shmaitin. This is a halacha Roish Tur. So if one field is, it comes to a triangle, comes to a point. We got a Beis Shura. It's another example in the Gemara later. These are examples of no kalayim concern because there's a separateness, there's a heker. Says Rashi here in our case as well. Varei yeshkan heker gadol. Over here as well, it's very distinct. They look very separate. Why? Ruach zu. So the vegetable is placed on one side, and one of the perimeters is ruach tzafim v'darim, is planted going from tzafim to darim, from north to south. So it's heading in this direction. Vizru, and the vegetable is placed on the other side, zruah mizrach is planted going from east to west. So they're perpendicular to each other. Therefore, they're separate, they're distinct, and there's no confusion. So this svara, this logic pertains to the zraim, which are planted alongside the perimeter of this patch. Aval bein zerahim tsoy. However, says Rashi, we have a concern regarding the zera right in the middle of this patch, because there, it's actually parallel to the other plants. Aval bein zerahim tsoy, between the middle one, so those planted along the sides. In this case, we do need a more significant distancing, a archaka kedei to ensure the separation of the source of nourishment. Why? Because there ain't sham heker. Because with regard to the middle one, there's no heker, because it's parallel to the other ones. We have a mekari, and if they would be close to him, have a irva, it would be considered confused, mixed up, and kalayim. Therefore, we need a separation of 3 tfachim between the middle one and the one on the sides. And the 3 tfachim actually includes the space of the plant itself. So as long as a harchak of 3 tfachim, that is sufficient to separate not only the plant, but also the yanika, the source of nourishment. This ensures that they both draw their nourishment from 2 separate patches of earth. So indeed, we can plant no less than 5 varieties in this small patch without any concern of kalayim. They look separate, they're distinct, and they're not mixed with each other, and therefore they're not kalayim. Okay, time for a brief review of today's daf. We began by listing 3 forms of wagons and 3 forms of teves chests. One of them is suitable for sitting, therefore it can become tamim midras. For instance, the zav would sit on it without even directly contacting it. It becomes an avatuma. What if it's not roy shiva but is roy kabbalah to receive? In that case, it is not tamim tumas medras, it gets the other tumas. If it's not ready for any of these functions, it is tar. What about this chest that's very large? It has the shiur of 40 sa, that is tar, completely tar. What about the wagon, which is large? So if it can be hitched to the oxen, it is customary to carry in that manner. It is tamei, is regarded as a kli. We proceed with the halacha that a kli cheres will be makabel tumas maga, but not tumas medras. A kli eitz will be makabel both tumas. What about a ship? So certainly tumas medras will not apply to a ship. But what about tumas maga? So according to our Mishnah, and likewise according to the Tanakam and the Brisa, any type of ship is tar. It's connected to Yam and it's tar. According to Chananya, this exemption will apply to a large boat, a large wooden boat, but not to a small wooden boat which can be carried even when full, and not even to a large boat of cheres, because this halacha does not apply to material of cheres. we proceeded with the source of the halacha that a kli cheres cannot be become a tumas medus. We have the pasuk of Isha sheishkav mishkava. We have the pasuk of mishkan idasa, which connects the mishkav to the person. The mishkav needs to have the potential of tahara b'mikvah, to immerse in a mikvah and become tahara, as opposed to a kli cheres, which does not have that ability and therefore cannot become tamei tumas medus. We have another source from Tzavet Pasal, which seems to indicate that even if a ishtay nida sits on it, the pasuk indicates clearly that this thing will not become tamei. Apparently, a kli cheres cannot become tamei tumas medus. We conclude with the halacha that a small vegetable patch, can contain no less than 6 varieties without any concern whatsoever of isser kalayim.